For change, in the last year, an international roadmap of SDG 7 was laid out in the United Nations High-Level Dialogue on Energy during COP26. Where do we stand on the roadmap as of May 2022, as of today? How do we effectively drive this agenda at the United Nations General Assembly in September, as well as during COP27 in November? To help us reflect on these questions, I invite to come to the stage Nijo Topping, United Nations High-Level Climate Action Champion for COP26, and he is the moderator for this session. Please, the stage is yours. I would also like to welcome to the stage Dr. Sherien Fekri Abd El Ghaffar from the Egyptian Ministry of Environment. I would also like to welcome Lawrence Tubiana, the CEO of the European Climate Foundation and a person who knows her way around COPs. Welcome to the stage. And finally, we have Ghislaine Irakoze, Rwanda pre-COP26 Youth Representative. Nigel, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. Let me start by thanking Dambalola for inviting me here. And many people have talked about how forceful Dambalola is. It was a compelling invitation, but I'm delighted that I said yes. I mean, not only is it great to be meeting friends, old and new, but it's a reminder that only when we gather collectively do you have those wonderful serendipitous meetings that you weren't expecting or planning, from which many of our new ideas and new partnerships come. So thank you. As Fiona said, we're going to my dear friend Gonzalo Munoz from Chile often described the fact that we can either look at the state of progress as a snapshot, as a picture, or we can look at it as a movie, as momentum changing. So and when we look at it as a snapshot, we tend to be quite gloomy because the gap between where we are, the 760 million, the 2.6 billion, is huge. It can be overwhelming. But when we look at it as a movie, it can be more empowering. So now we're going to look at the movie from the High-Level Energy Dialogue, the first time world leaders have come together at the UN to talk about energy for over 40 years, to COP27. And we're going to start with an address from Patricia Espinosa, Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, and then I'm going to invite my panelists to explore that journey from New York to Glasgow and then forward to New York and to Sharm El-Sheikh. So if we could start with the address from Patricia, please.
President Kagame, honorable colleagues, I am pleased to join this discussion on clean and equitable energy transitions. In 2022, it is hard to understand how more than 750 million of our fellow citizens still do not have access to electricity. Roughly 2.5 billion people still don't have clean cooking facilities. And so many premature deaths continue to be linked to household air pollution, all because the poor and the most vulnerable must rely on unclean cooking fuels simply to feed their families. Surely, in 2022, this cannot be acceptable. Not with the technology, ingenuity, and resources available throughout the world. Yet, the United Nations High-Level Dialogue on Energy recently highlighted just how far we are from realizing our pledge to ensure universal access to energy. And if we are to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, we must ensure not only access to energy, but access to clean energy. We know that it will require, as rapidly as possible, a significant reduction in the use of fossil fuels and the transition to renewable energy. I am under no illusions. This will be a significant task. It will require an approach that simultaneously addresses both sustainability and climate. In the final analysis, energy transition is not just a decarbonization agenda, as critically important as that is for the climate. It is also a development agenda urgently needed to address energy inequities around the world. However, such development must be aligned with the climate goals. In many ways, they are two sides of the same coin. But balancing the two will be a challenge. Getting to net zero emissions by 2050 is a case in point. Net zero is indeed essential for the survival of the planet. But we need action now if we are to get to 2050. Specifically, we need to reduce emissions 45% by the end of this decade. Only 8 years remain. We need plans now. The transition to achieve all of this will not be easy, and it will not take place overnight. Yet nations must also ensure it is a just transition so that workers are considered and that they have access to retraining and other tools that they need to ensure the prosperity of their careers, livelihoods, and families as well. The good news is that these concerns are now being reflected in some national climate action plans or NDCs. 29% of parties have indicated they plan to address transitional problems by including appropriate strategies for protecting workers. But we need more commitments along these lines. The current level of NDC pledges remains insufficient to achieve either our temperature goals or our clean energy goals. This was acknowledged at COP26 in Glasgow last year, following discussions focusing on efforts to achieve transitions to clean energy. With respect to clean energy, the good news is that the cost of renewables is falling, but much more technological effort is required, including electrifying transportation, buildings and industry, and remaking existing power grids to supply cleaner electricity. Colleagues, there can be no easing up on our efforts. Climate change remains the most significant, alarming, and rapidly escalating crisis facing humanity. We need bold, collective action now. It is entirely possible we can achieve a green and fair energy transition. But we need two things: to meet commitments already made and then to significantly follow up strong promises with even stronger climate action and sustainable development progress. I look forward to working with you to make that happen. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Patricia. I think very clear that we both need more ambition and we need to focus on action now, and with a very strong theme of equity and development, which we've been hearing a lot running through all that. The good news from the high-level energy dialogue in September last year is that we actually do have very short-term action goals. 500 million access to clean energy, 1 billion clean cooking, 35 billion on clean energy, 25 billion on clean cooking. So very concrete, doubling renewable energy globally, no new coal, winding down the fossil fuel subsidies, and 30 million jobs. So some real specificity there. That's 2025, and there are also 2030 goals. So let's start looking now at what that journey has been so far and where we need to get to by UNGA and COP27. And I wanted to start with Dr. Sherian Fekri, who's the Assistant Minister of Environment in Egypt. I've been fortunate enough to visit Egypt a couple of times in the last 6 months. So I think it's a really important story of how you're moving on both energy access and clean energy. So, Assistant Minister, maybe you could give us a flavour of how things are changing in Egypt on the ground as you accelerate both access to clean energy and deployment of renewable energy.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of Of all, I would like to seize this opportunity to thank Rwanda government for the hospitality and the sustainable energy forum for all for invitation. Also, I would like to thank Mr. Chairman for inviting me to this panel on behalf of Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad, Egypt Minister for Environment and the COP27 Envoy and the Minister Coordinator. Egypt embraced the approach of green recovery and showed leadership on the regional level by being the first country in North Africa and the Middle East to issue green bond to finance renewable energy, sustainable transportation and housing, and as well as waste management, as a part of Egyptian efforts in the context of green recovery. In what was the region's first sovereign offering of climate-friendly securities. Moreover, let me in brief share with you what Egypt has done to address that matter and to create enabling environmental for energy transition. Egypt is rich in renewable energy resources, especially wind and solar, that qualify it to be one of the major renewable energy producers. Egypt has been the partner in the region in adapting renewable energy through policy tools and the national mega-scale project. All efforts has been under the umbrella of the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative, which would provide a regional roadmap. Current national efforts that Egypt is working on, including scheduling up on grading renewable energy, and to utilize this potential and accelerate the shift away from fossil fuel to clean energy and integrated sustainable energy strategy for 2035 was improved. 20% at 2022, it almost reached, in which the share of renewable energy in the energy mix will reach to nearly 42% by 2035. Currently, the total installed capacities from renewable energy reach nearly 6,000 megawatts from hydro, wind, solar. By the end of 2023, will reach to 10 gigawatt. Egypt regarding of energy efficiency in most sectors.
Okay. Great, thank you, Assistant Minister. I'm also struck in my visits to Egypt how fast some things change. I remember I met the head of the Suez Canal Authority in January, and we were talking about green hydrogen, which we're all getting excited about now, but it's relatively recently that we've realized what an important role it will have in the mix. He's an engineer, and he very honestly said to me, a year before, he thought it was science fiction, and now he's investing in green ammonia facilities in the Suez Canal zone because the demand signal is coming from companies like Maersk, who say they want to be 100% clean powered by 2040. So let's take a look then at the international context. Laurence, you know, as one of the key architects of many of the very clever subtleties of the Paris Agreement, but also now at ECF, you know, you have a great view over that quadrangle that Simon talked about: philanthropy, governments, multilateral finance, and the private sector and civil society. It's probably a pentagon, right? Tell us, what have you seen since that high-level energy dialogue and through Glasgow to today? What's changed? Where do you see momentum?
Thank you, Nigel, for this question. And I agree, it's pentagon more than fourth pillar. Even the Paris Agreement was built around this fourth. But I do think the civil society is playing an enormous role in every country, and in particular, of course, the country I'm working more in Europe, because that, you know, the pressure on government, which is so precious. How I can formulate, I will begin by the good thing. And of course, there are downsides to the actual situation we cannot ignore. The good thing is, I see in all these very difficult paths to net zero by 2050, and of course, with difference among countries, depending, of course, on the development level. And that's a very important fact that since Paris, now this is a concern for business, for governments, and for example, Rwanda is a wonderful example on how to get to that pathway with clear views. So this, in my view, from this high-level dialogue to Glasgow, and now, these many countries are working hard on their pathways and how to get to this energy transition. And energy has become to be a very concrete issue, not numbers, not just commitments, but now how we do that. We are in full mode of doing that, try to understand what does it mean. And I think that's a very important progress, because in a way, that's the way that it's not only pledges, but it's implementation. And then, of course, energy is at the core of everything because it's at the core of development. And I would say even human security, but I would talk to that later on. So this is very positive. The second positive was, of course, the mobilization of finance. Nobody paid attention too much on the Article 2, the finance piece in the Paris Agreement, but now it's just the thinking of the business in the financial markets of how we align with Paris Agreement. Remembering that Paris Agreement is not, of course, is about temperature, but it is about just transition and development. And that, in my view, is coming, again, to the implementation, even if we are far away from attracting, in particular, through blended finance that Dr. Ajay Mathur referred to, which was a big conclusion of the ministerial dialogues yesterday, that we need to have this blended finance happen for real. So again, good pathway, and you have been, Nigel, instrumental to really mobilize this private sector, the business and the financial sector to that direction. So two very good things, and in particular now coming together, all these Pentagon coming together around these just energy transition plans, which really the international finance, both the donors, the MDBs, and the private sector has to respond. And of course, South Africa was raised as a good example because it was a genuinely South Africa-led exercise with this national commission headed by the president, Ramaphosa, and that I think it's a model of cooperation and that we should go forward. So these are good things. And again, I hope that we'll, with the G20, and thank you to our courageous Indonesian presidency to bring the G20 to their commitment, and we still are lagging behind on many of them. Now, the concern. The concern is still on finance, and I can say that even if we have made progress, and I hope in Sharm, the commitments to adaptation funding will be there, and we will have advanced the dialogue and concrete proposal on the loss and damage. It's absolutely central. We cannot ignore that anymore. So that's more a challenge, but I think we could go there and we could have in Sharm we have had long conversation about adaptation. Now is the moment to be concrete. And I think now there is an understanding we cannot postpone this discussion. Now we cannot ignore that we have in a crisis mode at world level because the hike of prices in food, and particularly your country, Madam, is unfortunately very affected by that. Oil and gas prices doesn't come immediately from the Ukraine, the invasion by Russia to Ukraine. It came before. The gas and oil price were getting up already before because of the economic recovery and, of course, the ramping up of the economy after 2 or 3 years of really standstill. But now this is creating an enormous tension. And I am worried about, we heard more about military and defense and geopolitical tensions, in particular in my region, where I can say people are very afraid of an atomic war. And then we are just forgetting the big danger, the big threat out there, which is climate change. And we are talking about more and more weaponry and not a lot more international cooperation. So I would argue that Sharm should be the place where we defend climate action, renewable energy, clean energy as a project of peace. We need peace. We cannot live in a world where the unique rationale is how much power, physical, military power you have. that doesn't lead to anything. And anyway, climate change will ignore that, by the way. So I do think that presenting climate action and clean energy, which is the objective of this forum, as a peace project, as I am arguing that in Europe, where I push, of course, that's my organization mission, really Europe to be more active, to cut dependency about oil and gas from Russia, but to do what? To accelerate the renewable development. So I do think Sharm could be the moment where the multilateral community say, okay, war is, we should minimize this impact, we should look for peace, we should look for cooperation even between enemies. And that is really important, even in this region, the continent, and many other places in the world level. So that's my call. I think we can do it, but we need a lot of energy. And again, you know, that's why renewable energy is a peace element. And I will close there, Nigel. And sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional. But you know, so many wars have been fought because of oil or because of fossil fuel resources. And then dependency, just remember Iraq. Not only talking about Ukraine, which of course is a concern I have these days. So, and just to tell you one message, which for me was emotional. I received a letter from the Ukrainian Minister of Environment saying, we want to rebuild with you Ukraine with an ecological transition, out of coal, out of gas, and that's the opportunity to do it. So this could be a peace project, and I'm sure that Egypt can lead that.
Great. Thank you, Lawrence. That's a lovely idea. I just want to follow up, actually, Lawrence, because you know, moments of crisis can be moments of pivot, and they can be a pivoting backwards or a pivoting forwards. Actually, Trotsky said that war is the locomotive of history, that it speeds things up, whichever direction you go in. Interestingly, you know, we haven't talked much about debt and about the lack of fiscal headroom, which of course is being made much worse by high commodity prices and inflation. And so many of the already highly indebted emerging and developing countries have even less headroom. My colleague, the Egyptian high-level champion, Dr. Mohideen, of course, having been both a Minister of Investment and now working at the IMF, is very clear about the need for a very different approach to restructuring debt. We're basically stuck. And interestingly, Janet Yellen called quite strongly in a speech recently for reform of the Bretton Woods institutions. So I think it's possible to dream that not only of a peace COP, but of a building back ecologically, which also includes reforming some of the institutions which maybe are no longer serving the purpose that they were built for. But before, I want to come to Ghislain and talk about what's changing on the ground as a young entrepreneur. But before I do that, it's maybe too soon to tell, Laurence, but some people see the crisis in Iraq as an accelerator of deployment of renewables. That's happening in Europe, but it's also accelerating certainly some short-term investment in fossil fuels. Net, when we look back, hopefully quite soon, but say in 5 years, when we look back in a peaceful future, do you think that this crisis is going to be an accelerator of deployment of clean energy or slow down progress?
Of course, the discussion is in full mode in Europe. And it's normal that, you know, the incumbent of the sector, and I, of course, in mind some, of course, powerful companies in my country, are arguing that it's not the moment of ecological transition. We may have even political movements that try to portray climate action as a very polarizing political topic. And we see that in the United States in particular. But so I do think that the resolve, and in a way, that's a rational solution. And at some point, there is now, and I see that on the European side, and again, the countries that are wanting now to be part of Europe, and you know there are many, many ones, and we have ethically need a responsibility to integrate them in whatever form. They want the Green Deal as, again, that's a very European discussion. And in a way, that's good that every country reflects of its own plans. And I think Sharm could confront that it is an accelerator for Europe. It could be an accelerator elsewhere, because this volatility of fossil fuel price is not healthy. It's not healthy even for the budget of the government that really export oil and gas revenues and balance that budget with that. It's just so uncertain. And we don't know, 5 years ago, in 2035, I think Europe will be, the power will be entirely fossil-free. So that will cut a part of the global market. Others will, of course, stay. But I think it's reasonable to try to protect oneself from the uncertainty and the volatility of these world markets. You know, security is about that. It's about reducing risk and uncertainty. And this volatility of global markets, we have enough with food prices. And that's why even food security should be hand in hand. So anyway, and really your point on reforming the Bretton Woods institution is key. We cannot discuss within UNFCCC all these problems. We need IMF, and I really commend Kristalina Georgieva's action for putting climate change and support. And we should think about debt swaps, but the debt crisis is very, very now, should be in the agenda. And I'm sure that Egypt could be a good flag that very importantly. Oh, good idea.
Thanks, Laurence. Ghislain, I want, so we can have the geopolitical perspective, but then what's happening on the ground? In the high-level energy dialogue, there was also commitment to phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, and we've heard from many of the speakers the importance of policy and regulatory reform in creating the environment for investment. Now, we often think of like massive international investment in huge solar or wind projects, but we also need lots of investment in the job creators of the economy, the small and medium-sized enterprises. And I know you were a representative for Rwanda at the pre-COP 26, but you're also a young entrepreneur in a young continent that's developing fast and is going to need to look to its young entrepreneurs. What do you see in terms of the changing environment for young people to become clean technology entrepreneurs in the short but ambitious time that you've been driving Wastestone?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Niger. So yeah, as you say, the African continent is really having this young population which have like ambition to drive change. And like the last 4 years has been almost like a challenging, especially for young entrepreneurs that were scaling their businesses. So the pandemic itself really imposed different difficulties on the whole value chain. So the value chain itself, before the pandemic was fragmented, and just even in the pandemic itself was really more fragmented. So you're talking about how most of the businesses really suspended their activities. So I'd say at this stage, we are recovering. So basically trying to prioritize sustainable recovery. And generally, there's also really a young and biggest wave of clean energy entrepreneurs coming up in the continent. And for the African continent, it's more of sustainable transformation, especially the way we can prioritize businesses that create jobs, because the next 50 years we have the biggest workforce in the world. So how do we make sure that such workforce have enough jobs to sustain their lives? So it's been a challenging time, but almost there are different opportunities coming up. But even though those opportunities coming up, there's also challenges. So we're talking about getting investment to really scale those businesses. So most of traditional financial instruments that we have in the continent, such as bank loans, are beyond the reach, especially for SMEs and startups coming up. So how do we get innovative financial instruments? I mean, here we are talking about like a venture capital investment, so which are really tailored for startups and SMEs, so which accommodates different needs of those SMEs. So how do we ensure that we attract different angel investors, venture capital firms to invest in clean energy? So there has been like this pessimism around the clean energy businesses, but I'm glad that the narratives are changing. So the sector itself is really becoming promising for such investors. So, and this is when the government can actually comes in just to ease such policies that allows those investors to come on the continent, as well as even gauge the perception of local investors who are there who can actually boost such investment landscape in Africa. So those policies should be really kind of like amended to ensure that we really widen such investment base, ensuring that they can be able to tap into local talent which are on the continent. Speaking on the talent itself, so yeah, we get investment, but what happens when it goes to human resources that we need? So also having this talk with the friend who recently secured a job in one of the biggest renewable energy company in the world. So I was just talking about how it's really difficult to get such jobs, especially entry-level jobs. So it's really problematic for young people to get there. So we're talking about how do we establish different R&D infrastructure which could boost such talents in renewable energy. So again, not just to serve big corporates, but also to even drive SMEs and startups that want to scale their businesses. So I guess this goes about how we create some research facilities on the continent, as well as even create this new wave of engineers who are really equipped to serve in the local market. So yeah, I believe as long as we enable great policies that attract investment and even create those facilities to boost local talent, I think we'll be in the best way to shape the narrative of the continent.
Great, thank you. It's interesting you talk about the need for, yes, policies to be aligned, but also the local finance community to be. I was talking to the CIB, which is one of the leading Egyptian banks, and one of the first to commit to net zero, and they're doing a lot of work educating their bankers and working with SMEs and are finding that actually there are lots of opportunities to invest or lend into clean, equitable transitions, which don't require blended finance or international finance. And I think that's also interesting because as that ecosystem develops, it also makes the whole ecosystem more investable for others because they see something going on and they see dynamism, which is itself very attractive. Great, thank you, Ghislaine. Laurence has already started looking forward a little bit to COP, but I want to specifically look forward now. It's only 6 months away. It's the first COP on the African continent for 5 years, actually for 6 years, right? Because the last one was Morocco, but for 5 COPs. So let me go back to you, Dr. Fekri. Tell us a little bit about Egypt's plans for the COP, for hosting this first COP on the African continent for 6 years.
Yeah. First, I would like to express Egypt's appreciation for the efforts made in last COP26 in Glasgow in the most addressed aspects, and congratulations on the achievement during. Therefore, Egypt will build on what has been successfully achieved in Glasgow, continue of political momentum to achieve balance, progress in all negotiation tracks, complete to remaining work and mandates on different agenda items we would get from Glasgow. Egypt hosting COP27 on behalf of Africa. We would also like to emphasize that Egypt considers this phase as an implementation phase. We have almost finished the Paris rulebook. We should now focus on how to implement it and accelerate accessing to the means of implementation. Climate action includes enhancing action on mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation, including climate finance, and the necessary actions that need to be undertaken by developed countries to address this gap in climate finance. Egypt is working in a package of initiatives to enhance climate action, global initiatives and regional initiatives. Among such initiatives is the Sustainable Transportation Initiative, which aims to providing better quality of life as a basic pillar of economic and social development necessary to achieve comprehensive development goals and the national projects.
Thank you. I think I was with Minister Fouad, your minister, last week, who's also explaining some of the work that she's doing. I think you call it a national climate dialogue. For those of you who haven't met Minister Fouad, she was the president of COP 14 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, so very experienced multilateralist. But you'll rarely find a minister more passionate for the topic. She's now going around all the governorates of Egypt, having conversations with politicians, business leaders, academics, young people, to try and create a global, a collective sense of what Egypt's trying to create, both within the country, across the whole country, but on behalf of and with Africa. So, and I know your point about making this really the implementation COP. Again, Mahmoud Mohidin, my fellow champion, every day it's like implementation, 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 projectize everything. So thank you, Assistant Minister. Laurence, when you finish your train of thought, what do we need? And remember, we've got UNGA, which is another big heads of state gathering in the context of the Ukraine crisis as a stepping stone towards Sharm El-Sheikh. What do we need to be really calling for, or looking for, or pushing for as evidence that the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Climate Pact are really working and accelerating action on the ground?
First, I understand that Antonio Guterres will be an active force to mobilize. I understand he wants to launch a major initiative on renewable energy. You see him in every place to try to push action on accountability on renewable energy. And of course, he will be calling the G20 countries, and thanks to Indonesia, to do that difficult job in this context. Because we have to, the G20 countries have to, and the ones who have pleaded for more ambitious commitments have to really demonstrate they can do it. And of course, we have concern with, of course, the United States situation, as well as, of course, and now is that Europe is facing. So UNGAS would be a moment where the one has really pledged for more ambitious commitment for 2030, and of course, for the net zero, for the one who has not taken pledges, but demonstrate that they have the tools to be, to really fit with the commitments. And then the one who has not done, do it again at that particular moment, because again, it's a head of state level. I think the second element is, I think, and thanks to the job you have been doing, Nigel, is really, again, the same thing on the other pillars of the climate action. We need the MDBs to be much more forceful, and hopefully we will have the World Bank and the other regional development bank really stepping up their action. And we will have this connection with the financial problem that every developing country is facing, and in particular in this region because of the debt. And we need finally to have the businesses and the private finance actors, again, to see that they have made pledges, and to, in a way that will be a good moment that they disclose how they intend to do that and what the first progress, and then of course the difficulties, because it's not easy. So I think it could be a moment of truth, and I think it would give them energy for Sharm.
Great.
Implementation COP, you want to.
So a peace COP and a moment of truth. Ghislain, from your perspective, and I guess remembering that increasingly the COPs are both a multilateral negotiation forum and a forcing moment for some of the other changes that Laurence was talking about in the private sector and at a non-national level of cities and regions who've become important actors. What would be your what will you be pushing for, and what do you see the sort of voice of young Africans looking for from this road now to Sharm El-Sheikh?
Okay, thank you. I think our phase 3 role, the efforts taken by the UK government and Italian government last year, when they convened almost 400 young people in Italy to really have such conversation. So I guess that was the initial step, especially in ensuring that young people has really this voice at the center of almost this COP26 last year. So yeah, we developed a manifesto, even though it was not, didn't get like much attention in COP26, but I believe this was really a great initiative, especially because besides having such conversation, it actually fostered such really great network among young people. So like as we move forward to COP27, so I guess just touch based on the manifesto we developed. So there are really different actions that we suggest that should be prioritized by different governments and institutions, but yet we didn't see any action taken. So firstly, I think for Africa, it's more of green recovery. So we are prioritizing green recovery. So because all the economies on the continent were really mostly devastated by the pandemic. And as we prioritize green recovery, I guess we touch base almost the financial commitment made by the countries for developing countries. So again, so we didn't see it coming up. But almost as we prioritize such financial commitments, I guess there is like a new way to visualize in a way Africa can get involved. So we need to be part of the whole investment value chain because beyond that, we see climate action as an opportunity to create economical multipliers. Because, for instance, the renewable energy itself creates different economical multipliers. So we're talking about the continent which is eager to create different jobs for its youth. So how do we ensure that such clean energy creates such industrialization across the continent to allow or provide or create such opportunities? We are talking about the continent which needs to boost its agricultural systems. And energy really play a crucial part, especially ensuring that we achieve food security on the continent. So there's like a really huge nexus between renewable energy and different economical sectors on the continent. So, but again, as we say that, we want to ensure that like Africa can part of the whole investment value chain, especially moving beyond what we call like a financial aid. So how do we attract different investments, especially private sector investment that could trigger or boost the renewable energy on the continent? And beyond that, we know that we have like different countries on the continent which produce different rare elements which make up the battery. But again, so we just export outside of the continent. So how do we create like a local industrialization that can just tap into local resources which are available on the continent? And we know that in Africa, even priorities themselves, cross collaborative between countries is quite limited. So I guess like as countries, as African countries start to pave the way for the COP27 coming up. So we need to ensure that we create this cross collaborative between countries, especially if we want to create like a strong value chain in renewable energy, especially creating this interdependence between countries. There's a way that could trigger, especially energy distribution of the continent. But again, the value chain itself is really fragmented, which I believe is more of like a political affiliated reasons. So how do we ensure that we really put those differences in the political structures, ensure that we create such cross collaboration between countries? So I believe beyond that, there is be a way we can ensure that we make most of the COP27 come up. So another key point I would maybe stress out is just youth inclusion, so which was really problematic in the last COP26. So yeah, we developed a manifesto in pre-COP26, but again, when it goes to COP26, youth inclusion was not really something to be proud of, especially in the whole COP26. So most of negotiations rooms were not open to young people. That's the first thing we need to acknowledge. So how do we ensure that young people have such space or valuable space on the table? So because at the end of the day, something that we need to kind of like argue with is just there's a new methodology to foster international dialogues, and this should be done especially in, as we pave the way to COP27. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. Well, look, thank you to all of you for your contributions. Let me just try and wrap up a wide-ranging conversation. Yes, we see momentum. Yes, we see progress. We've heard some of that earlier this morning, some of the pledges, the G20 focus, the great work of SE for All. But we face really challenging geopolitical headwinds. I think the idea of making this the COP of peace is a wonderful idea, but also for many people, I think it is a moment of truth, as we've talked about. It's a moment of truth in terms of demonstrating that commitments that have been made are being delivered, which is why it needs to be the implementation COP. It's a moment of truth in terms of inclusivity. It's a moment of truth in terms of credible momentum that delivers on what I think is in many ways the iconic bringing together of clean energy and an equitable, just transition, which the work of SE for All so strongly represents. I think also, and it's come out across the ministerial roundtables, and you mentioned it, Ghislaine, this topic of, yes, multilateral collaboration, North-South collaboration, but also very strong South-South collaboration and regional collaboration. You know, I saw that the 6 African countries launched the African Green Hydrogen Coalition today to try and drive some of those issues you talked about matching supply and demand and the skills in the supply chain. We are halfway on the road from Glasgow to Sharm El-Sheikh, and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Egypt for your leadership in Sharm El-Sheikh. Everybody here is part of Team Egypt now to make sure that the COP27 is the success that we all need it to be. So let me ask you all to join me in thanking our panelists.